Hey Taylor.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Let's see. So I'm going to attempt to do like a screen share today because I have some slides.
Okay.
Um, if I'm trying to get my screen set up to where I can see like the live Facebook feed and respond to comments. But if stuff's rolling in and I just am blowing right through it, please interrupt me at any time and say, hey, slow down, dude. You got questions over here, and I'll stop the share and make sure that I ask them.
No problem.
All right. Brian Strump is with us today? Or is this somebody else using Brian Strump's account? Still got a couple minutes before we get started. What's that?
It's Coach Buffy. I'm not Brian.
Hey, Buffy, how are you today?
I'm good. Sorry, the link takes me through as Brian, not myself.
That's okay. We'll give some others just another minute before we get rocking and rolling. While we are waiting for people to hopefully, fingers crossed, join in on Zoom, I want to make this as interactive and get as much Q&A as possible. And especially with the topic that we've got today, if we could do it in real time and be on Zoom together, that would be like my perfect ideal scenario. If you don't want to have your camera on, I totally get it. It takes me a good 3 minutes to look as good as I do. So totally get if we don't have the time to do your hair like I do mine. But if you can join on Zoom, I would absolutely love to do that. So for those that might just be watching us on Facebook, today we're going to talk about the basics of program design. But again, while we're waiting, I do want to make note of one thing. If you guys have not seen or heard, I have no idea what the Two Brain Summit is. That is an event that we have coming up in the middle of June. For those of you guys that are not gym owners, potentially coaches, GMs, CSMs, all that kind of stuff, talk to your owner, tell them you've heard nothing but great things. If for no other reason than this year, one of our keynote speakers is Jocko Willink, and he is going to open things on day one. And then on day two, Lisa Nichols is going to open things. And we have a full slate of stuff geared towards coaches this year. So if you've been around Two Brain and you were present for the summit last year, it was just more geared towards the owners. We didn't have the opportunity to run a coach's owners track. We are back to doing that this year. So if your owner purchases their ticket to attend the Two Brain Summit this year, the coach's side is free. So you certainly want to jump in at the star of the party is now here. Mike Watson, thank you for joining us today, my friend.
That's a lot of pressure. I was just going to listen in.
That's fine.
Whenever Josh Martin's speaking, I want to hear it.
Oh man, that's pressure now. Goodness. Okay, so I'll get going. And I was telling Taylor earlier, right as we were getting on, that I'm going to attempt to do a screen share because I prepared slides today. Hopefully, I do this the correct way. Can you guys give me like a thumbs up? Do you see just the slide or do you see all the other 600 tabs that are open on my computer? Just a slide. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's jump into this thing. So, oh, I can see it on my other screen over here. That's so cool. So what we're going to talk about today is a potentially one of my favorite things to talk to coaches, new and veteran coaches alike, is just program design. And this has really been a hot topic lately. I've had a lot of conversation with owners and coaches. How do I train my new coaches to create programming? How much continuing education should I give to my coaches about programming? What are the best ways to do all these things? Programming is certainly one of those pieces of the coaching puzzle that can dominate a ton of time, but it doesn't need to be. I find that owners and coaches alike really like to complicate this little task that is a part of coaching and make it into something that it does not need to be. So that's what I aim to do today, is just to simplify it so that you guys can be effective and efficient at program design. So ultimately, why do we care about program design? There's a couple of things. One is that I know coaches and owners spend a lot of time doing this. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just recognizing that it is a big part of what we do as coaches. Program design is also the piece of the puzzle that is actually moving your clients closer to their goal or their goals. So I mentioned this already. I want you to be effective, meaning I want you to write good programming, and then I also want you to be efficient. It is not common for me to, or is not uncommon for me to talk to coaches and owners and hear that they spend hours upon hours per month writing programming for their clients. That is not an efficient use of your time. Now, when you are a brand new coach just learning how to do program design, yes, it is going to take up a lot more of your time relative to somebody who has been doing it for a while. But I would say that a good goal, if anybody kind of wants to jot this down, is that on a client by client basis, you should aim to spend about 15 minutes writing, let's just say, a week of program design for that person. Not an hour, not 2 hours, but maybe 15 minutes to work your way through that. So the last piece about why we care about program design is because when you know that you have written something very effective, it boosts your confidence. And I'm glad Mike is on this call today, because if there's one piece of feedback that he has shared with me multiple times in getting to talk to coaches from around the world that they lack, is confidence in themselves. And so I'm hoping that clearing up some of the stuff about program design today can help you guys get some more confidence with that. So if you've been on any of my other office hours, you know that I like to talk, I love to teach and educate, but I also want to provide you with a very quick out early on in the presentation. So I call this the Cliff's Notes version of it. So if you want to log off at the 7-minute mark, then here's the Cliff's Notes of my entire presentation today. How do you do great program design? You assess, you communicate, and you make it easy for your client to come back tomorrow. So assess your client, communicate with your client, make it easy for them to come back tomorrow. But now let's go through just 8 basic principles of what great program design looks like. It's actually 7, I lied, sorry. 8 is the homework. All right, principle number 1 is we want you to assess your client, all right? A couple of things with this. It needs to be measurable and it needs to be repeatable. I really don't care what kind of assessment you do. For instance, at my gym, we use a combination of the FMS. For those of you guys that know what that is or don't know, it's the functional movement screen. We use that. We use some basic fundamental movement patterns, and then we use the flywheel bike. And in our specific case, it is the assault air bike that we use in our assessment of clients. Number 2, know that the assessment is not for you to point out what they are bad at. And I know, especially when people hear functional movement screen or assessment, that it's like you're holding up this, scoreboard that says, hey, you failed this, you can't do this. It's not about that at all. What it's about for you as the coach is to know what they're capable of, because ultimately that's where their program design is going to begin. So if you assess somebody, and I'm just using this very broad general concept, and they're a level 2 out of 10, their program design doesn't begin at 9 to take them to a 10. It needs to begin at like a 2.1 to take them to a 2.2. Okay, so just a very general concept there. The other thing that you're going to do is you're going to pair that assessment with learnings from your consult. All right, some examples of this, your in-body scan, lifestyle factors that you took into account whenever you first talked with them. What is their training age? Do they have experience in fitness? How much? What kind? Were they a collegiate or professional athlete? Or are they just somebody who went to the doctor, got some less than ideal news and decided they needed to actually improve their health and fitness? What's their biological age? And then what kind of resources do they have? And specifically what we're talking about here is time. So the other thing that an assessment should do is, I'm a big believer that it should help you see 3 things. Number 1 is you need to be able to see positions that your client can get into. So I think of this as like static. So as I'm standing here presenting to you guys, if you could see my full body, you'd see that I'm actually like kind of slumped over on one side. You know, if I talk about hip pain later on, that could give you a little bit of insight into what's going on. So the first thing we want to be able to see is positions. The number 2 thing is patterns. And in Two Brain Coaching, we teach 5 fundamental movement patterns: squat, hinge, push, pull, and carry or core. I know a lot of people refer to it as the core. So we want to see them move through those. And then we also want to see what I call pacing. This could be stuff, breathing wise. It's basically asking, how do they respond to some low level metabolic activity? A great example, if I put Mike onto the assault bike for 10 minutes and say, hey man, I just want to see what you can do in 10 minutes. That is me watching how he responds to some low level aerobic activity. All right. So positions, pattern, and pacing. So feedback piece number 1. And Mike, you have to play this game. Buffy, you have to play since you're on the Zoom as well. Do you guys assess your clients? And if yes, what are you doing? And then for those of you guys that are listening live on Facebook, if you could just drop into the comments what you are doing. If you assess your clients, what are you doing? No judgment. I just want to know if you are assessing, if you're not, and if you are, what are you doing? And then Taylor, I know you said you do some fitness stuff. So, and maybe not from a coach's perspective, but from a client perspective, did you get an assessment when you started your last fitness program? While you guys think about that stuff, I'll take a sip of water and stare awkwardly into the camera.
We've run the full range, Josh, at Catalyst, from ridiculously over the top to somewhat simple. We used to do a movement screen. Before we started CrossFit, we kind of did this movement screen that went over 2 sessions, and it was a lot of stuff.
Whoa.
The problem with doing a lot of stuff was it did what you highlighted, is it acted almost like a report card to say, here's all the things you're terrible at and we got to fix you, but here's a few things you're good at that we can improve on. So we pared that down a little bit over a couple of years and did something very similar to what you're explaining until we adopted the level method. And so when we do level method, we kind of build those the positions, the patterns, and the pacing stuff into doing some testing based on the level method levels of assessment. And so we're kind of looking for those things as we put people through some benchmark type testing through their on-ramp programming. So we treat on-ramp as our 5 sessions of assessment. We don't always necessarily position it that way, where we would in the past do caliper measurements and we'd have them do a flexibility test. We look at it in terms of how they're moving throughout those 5 sessions, because sometimes you can get somebody on a good day, sometimes you can get somebody on a very bad day in terms of assessment. So the nice thing about doing that over the course of a couple of days is you see the average of what that person actually can and can't do.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I mean, a bad day versus good day and what you're having them do, that's it. That's huge. That's great, man.
But yeah, I think it gives you a clearer picture, right? And especially you get to see how people move once you've asked them to do some of the things we want to do in our gyms, right? Some people will almost be carried back into the gym the next day, whereas others are going to skip back in and say, "Hey, what do you got for me today?" Like, you know, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" type of thing, right?
Something that I found really interesting at our gym, we have this big upfront consult with them before they even get into the assessment, and we go over training age and try to get an understanding of their experience. And this is usually guys that'll say this because guys are very proud. Like I've done this fitness thing, I've got years and years. And so then when we actually get into the assessment and we say something as simple as like, okay, well, show me what a squat looks like, and we don't demo it for them, but we just want to see, what is your level of knowledge. And it's very, very clear that their thinking of like fitness experience is not in line with what we are expecting in terms of like just base level fitness knowledge. So this is even another filter to say, okay, wait a minute. In the consult, they indicated training experience was here, but we're actually seeing that it is far, far, far lower. And that's what I'm going to get into when we talk about the second principle, which is really, sharing your insights with your clients.
Sure. I think simple, just to finally wrap my point up, the more simple you can do it, and the more, and I don't know if you'll touch on this, but it should be, I'm not sure what the actual word is here, replicable or replicatable.
Yeah,
where
repeatable
you
for
can,
sure. Yep.
yeah. So if you did somebody's assessment today and then you quit the gym, and I came in as the next coach to do a reassessment with that person, are we doing it the same way?
Yes.
Right. So.
Yep.
Just to add my answer, since you asked, the closest things I've had weren't necessarily in like the beginning of a program, but I did like repeated benchmarks. So like rowing benchmarks, running benchmarks for distance or for time. And I mean, I've personally measured my like maxes for certain lifts and things like that. And I've also had an in-body scan, which was depressing and terrible. So, but that's as far as mine went.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. The in-body is always a very interesting one. I used to love doing that. And this is the same way with some sort of physical assessment like we're talking about, is the way that I try to explain it to people. And I know some are more sensitive to, the data that pops out of this thing, but I'm just trying to get a sense of where we're starting from, and even if comp changes aren't on the menu, it's still very good for me as a coach to be able to kind of look under the hood to see like, okay, and the changes that I'm expecting, are we actually seeing that, over the long haul? Yeah. But I've also had people that say, okay, I'll do it. I want you to cover up the screen, and I don't even want to see the paper when it prints out. And me too, this, as much as some people like, it's not even for you, it's for me as the coach, like selfishly I want to. I've alluded to this when Mike was just finished talking there, but principle number 2 is after you assess, you want to share your insights with them for a couple of reasons. Number 1 is it really lays a great runway out for the client to show like the level of professionalism, care, and personalization that goes into each and every design that you write. So it's, hey, we did these things. This is what I found out, combined with your consult. This is what I'm thinking. And it's really important that you bring them into that conversation. So the question that I love to ask is, hey, you said that you've had some training experience. What are some things that you liked doing? And what are some things that you didn't like doing? And I actually use that in building my initial design. I'm going to put elements in there that they did like doing, even if in my head I'm thinking, that's not really the best choice. Maybe it's not my primary thing that I will have for them, but it is going to be in there because I do want people to enjoy what they're doing. So I'm going to give them a little bit of what they have said that they've liked and they want to do. But ultimately, what I know is that I want to take them to the place where they want what they actually need. And sometimes the things that they need are the things that they don't like. But I don't want to build an entire program around things that they might really need and benefit from, but that they don't like. Because at the end of the day, the best program that you're ever going to write is the one that your client actually sticks to long term. So you could have an amazingly designed program, but if they're not consistent with it, it's not going to work. That's just the end of the story there. So that's principle number 2. Principle number 3, we're going to go like big picture, and this is what I call using the 3 Ps. So we're going to prioritize, we're going to plan, and then we're going to progress over time. So when I mean prioritize is, what's the low-hanging fruit? What did you kind of find in those insights? If it was in the consult, if it was in the movement pieces that you saw, what is the low-hanging fruit? If you saw them squat and they were terribly shifted to one side, and that's kind of like the red flag that you saw pop out, great. Maybe that's the low-hanging fruit and we can work on just fixing that thing. Because ultimately what we're thinking about with priorities is what is going to get them to come back. So when I share with the insights, I can say, hey, Mike, I noticed that you really had an aggressive shift to the left whenever you squatted. So at the beginning of your design, we're going to work on bringing you back to neutral. What we're hoping to see from that is that it takes away your hip pain and your knee pain. What do you think of that? Mike's going to nod his head. He's going to be on board, because ultimately I know that if I can get Mike even just a very small win, I can get him to come back tomorrow, because ultimately it's success that breeds motivation, not the other way around. All right. So what's going to get them to come back? A small win. Okay. So that's prioritize. The second P is plan. Tell them what you are working towards. Did you notice a left-right imbalance? They might not ever care about it. But again, if you can explain to them why you are doing this particular thing in service of them, they are going to be more bought in. So are you working on balance? Are you working on symmetry? Are you working on just being consistent coming into the gym? That can also be part of your plan. And then ultimately, how can you connect that to their goals? So what I mean by that is there needs to be an alignment between what they're doing physically and what they want. Okay. The last piece is progressing or progress. And what ways can you show progress? This can be they learned a new skill. It can be that they fixed the hip shift that I talked about. It can be that they did more reps or more sets. It can be that they rested less in a workout. It can be any of those things and so much more. But being able to build on things over time really shows importance to them of having a coach that came up with the plan based on your priorities. And we call this the SAID principle, which stands for specific adaptation to imposed demand. You don't have to know that. There's not going to be a test or a quiz, but if you do, maybe it'll just jog some memory. But I like the idea of the 3 Ps. So that's principle number 3. So now we're going to go from big picture to actually like getting a little bit more tactical. So principle number 4, more acronyms, KISS and MED. I'm not going to teach it to you the way that my dad taught me the KISS principle, which was keep it simple, stupid. The way that I'm going to teach it to you is keep it super simple. At the beginning of the presentation, I said that coaches can make this a really, really big, complex topic, and it doesn't need to be. Your design should be very, very, very simple because it's going to be easy to progress them. If they're super complex and you look like Alan from The Hangover at the blackjack table with all the numbers and calculations and formulas, man, you are going to be spending 2 hours a week on every single client. But if you keep it simple, you won't. So the first thing you need to know is, do you have a novice client or an intermediate client? And for the purposes of the presentation today, I'm just stopping there. I'm not going to go into advanced or somebody that is trying out for the elite level or the Olympics or something like that, because 99.9% of the clients that we deal with are novice or intermediate. And here's a really easy way to figure out which one you have. A novice client is somebody who has accumulated no more than 500 training sessions. So if you have somebody that's coming 3 days a week for 50 weeks a year, that's about 3 years and 3 months to be a novice trainee. Okay, if they're coming, 5 times a week, it takes about 2 years, 5 times a week for 50 weeks a year to surpass that. Intermediate person is somebody who has accumulated at least 1,000 training sessions, which is just double of what the novice client recommendation is. These aren't hard and fast rules, but they are just general recommendations that you can apply to people that you are working with. So from a novice perspective, if we're thinking, what is the best way to actually elicit some sort of change for this person? There's a couple things. Number one is working the total body. So each day that they come in, I'm going to give them something that works every piece of their body, upper body, lower body. That's the easiest way to think of it. And then I would like to see them in an ideal situation at least 3 days per week. If they come 4, great. If they come 2, I can make it work, but the perfect scenario would be coming 3 days per week. And the focus is, I put in there motor control. I kind of hesitate to say that because it sounds like a little sciencey and you would never use that with a client, but it's basically a fancy way of saying we're teaching them how to move through basic patterns with control. So if you have ever worked with kids and you showed them how to squat, you will know what I mean when I explain this. When I tell my son who's 9 to squat and stand back up, it's like the elevator went out from under him. He falls to the bottom and then pops back up. So that is not a good example of somebody that has good motor control. But when I show him to do this with a tempo, okay, that is then training him through motor control. So he's got the basic pattern down, but he doesn't have it with control. And so that's where we're going to spend a lot of time with novice clients. Intermediate clients, meaning they've already worked through what the novice client has, we're going to do splits. And I'm actually going to show you some example training designs in just a minute, but just stick with me here. Splits as in day 1, they're going to go like upper body. Day 2, they're going to go lower body. Guess what? Day 3, back to upper body. So it's not upper and lower on the same day. Now I'm kind of intensifying things by just focusing on one area for that day. The focus for an intermediate client is going to kind of just move just a little bit to the right. We're going to go muscle endurance, which is, again, a term I would never use with a client, but I will backroom talk with you coaches. It's just increasing volume to challenge the motor control we worked on as fatigue starts to set in. And so again, with the intermediate person, 3 to 4 days is adequate to elicit the change that we're looking for. So that's the way to keep it super simple within Principle 4. Do you have a novice person or an intermediate person? If I've got novice, what am I doing with them? Intermediate, what am I doing with those guys? So continuing on, MED stands for minimum effective dose, meaning what is the least amount of training that you can give this person to move them closer to their goals. You don't need to go from 0, they can barely run 200 meters, to now we're going to do 1 mile repeats the next day. They don't need to go from can barely express a squat pattern to now we're doing 21, 15, 9 thrusters and pull-ups. What's the minimum that we can have them do that is going to elicit some sort of positive change? The big reason for that is we want to foster consistency, okay? We want them to be fully confident that when they wake up tomorrow, if I give them a workout today, they should be able to wake up tomorrow and feel fully confident in their capabilities to return and feel good. If we destroy them, if we put them through a battery of tests that's going to have them sore to where they can barely sit down on the toilet, the likelihood long-term that they're going to stick to whatever you're doing is going to be reduced. So minimum effective dose, We're looking for long-term sustainability within their fitness journey because, like I said a couple slides ago, consistency is what is going to win for these people. Before I bring on the sample training designs where it's like this is actually where the rubber meets the road, does anybody have any questions, feedback, concerns, comments? You want to throw tomatoes at your computer screen yet? Let's see. Make sure I'm not missing anything on the Facebook feed. Okay, so if you guys do, there's probably like a 30, 45-second lag. Just drop it into the Facebook comments for those of you guys that are watching there. And when I kind of see it populate on my screen, I'll pause when I get an opportunity and address the question. So what does it actually look like when you write a training design? So what I'm about to show you is by no means like revolutionary. Templates like this have been around forever, and I literally just drew this up, you know, over the past couple of days to just make it a very easy visual for you to see. But here's what it could look like for you to design a program for one of your individual clients that you work with. So this would be for the novice client. Remember, we talked about total body. So I'll kind of walk you through what I'm thinking about here. So number one, I designate day 1, day 3, day 5. So think of this as like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay, day 1, we're doing total body all 3 days. What is the primary priority that we saw that we want to address first? So that's the primary priority. And I honestly didn't plan it this way, but if you remember back to my example with Mike, we said Mike had like a big shift in his hips to the left whenever he squatted. So the pattern that I'm going to work on first is lower body pushing, which we would categorize as a squat with a knee focus. And what that means is when you squat, you can squat where there is a focus to the hip or there is a more knee dominant squat. So right here, we're going to focus on a more knee dominant squat as the primary priority. Secondarily, we saw that there was something in my upper body pulling vertical. So going from here to here, we noticed that that was an area that we could address. And then these others, I just kind of put in here as placeholders, what I call supportive pieces. So it could be some sort of core or carry. And then this is, depending upon your nomenclature, cyclical, getting onto a rower, a bike, a skier, running, jumping rope singles. You might call it monostructural work, but it's just where I'm turnover constantly over and over and over. So then we go into the next time they come in, which would be potentially a Wednesday. So day number 3 in that 5-day week. Now we go from primary priority being lower push. Now we're going to go to upper push, and this time vertical. So if you kind of take a screen capture of this as you want, if you want, but notice that I am changing out these patterns such that they are balanced, meaning I'm not going to do lower push knee dominant on Monday and then on Wednesday and then again on Friday. So I went lower push knee dominant on Monday. I'm going to balance that out by doing something that is hip dominant lower push on the last day. Okay. So it's super simple. It's just make sure that the program looks balanced. And so this is how we can transition from a novice client like this is to a intermediate client. It's going to blow your mind because it looks super similar to what I just went over here. Oh my gosh. The only thing that we changed is day 1 is an upper body day. So I'm going to go upper push horizontal, upper pull vertical. Why upper pull vertical and versus horizontal? That's just what I chose. This is where coaches can nitpick themselves to death. Okay? Don't get hung up on, would it be better to do this or to do that, especially when we're looking at like an initial design as this is represented as. Pick something and then make sure you pay attention to the rest of the principles, because the final one is where we're going to actually refine our design. So why not upper pull horizontal? Because I typed in vertical first. Now, if it was my primary priority, I would have put that up there, but it's not. All right. So then we just balance it out. Look here, we've got upper body on day 1 and day 5. So we're going to do the opposite. So we pulled vertical on day 1. We're going to pull horizontal on day 5. We pushed horizontal on day 1. We're going to push vertical, okay, on day 5. And then if we continue this out into like week 2, what you would see is that it would be lower body, but it would be lower push hip, lower pull knee. So again, it's just kind of going back and forth between these to design out a nice, well-balanced program for your client. How do we decide on what the exact exercises are, how many sets, how many reps, load, tempo, rest, all of that stuff? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because now we're going to talk about principle 5, which is writing the initial design. Okay? And here are some great pieces to kind of adhere to. Always go from simple movements to more complex movements. Always go from slow metabolic work to faster metabolic work, meaning get really, really good at the basics, the simple movements, before you introduce higher skill things. Get really, really good about slow metabolic type things before we ask them to go really, really fast. And always err on things seeming to be too easy. Why? Because it's very, very easy then for you as a coach to show them progress over time if you started things off a little too easy. If you went and got a little overzealous and started them too far, it's a much more challenging and unnecessary conversation that you should have to have as a coach to say, you know what? You actually, I know you feel like you did that workout, but you really just suffered through it. We're going to have to back you way up here. We don't want to get involved in that. So always err on the too easy side. In terms of exercise selection, well, go back to the assessment. Were they able to do a double leg bilateral squat? Yes? Okay, great. Go back to the assessment, look at what they can do. That's where your design should start. If they weren't able to do that, could they do anything single leg? Did your assessment look at that? If they weren't able to do double leg, could they do single leg stuff? Next is just understanding basics of contraction types. So we've got a couple to think about. One, isometric. Think about planks, holds. These are static contractions where there's no movement. The second type is concentric and eccentric. So I always try to teach people that these are controlled movements. So a bicep curl, a leg extension, a deadlift would be a great example of a controlled. We'd call these more strict movements. Kipping pull-up, dynamic. Strict pull-up is focusing on concentric and eccentric, all right? The third type would be cyclical, which I talked about just a minute ago, where there's just continual movement all the time, all right? If you remember back from the very first presentation I did, you know that I am big into cars. So think about the wheels on the bus go round and round. That's how you think about cyclical movements, is they're just continuing to stay moving over and over and over. There's a lot of turnover happening. The last type, and again, we're going from simple to complex, so this would be the last thing you would ever give to somebody, would be dynamic or explosive type contractions. Kipping pull-up, dynamic. Strict pull-up, concentric and concentric eccentric, i.e. controlled. The nice part about this is it really creates space for you to have a conversation when you progress people this way. Remember the 3 Ps. We had prioritize, plan. We want to show progression. When you do it this way, you can show this over the long term, but it gives space for this conversation to be had. So for the novice person, exercise selection, we're looking at simple exercises, 3 to 4 per movement pattern. The intermediate person, 2 to 3 per pattern, okay? There's a higher, and I don't want to just put high number of exercises. I said higher because it's relative, okay? Relative to when they become an intermediate trainee or client, they're going to be doing a higher amount of exercise selections per pattern as a novice versus the intermediate. Okay, so let's agree that we're all going to kind of use that idea for this. Reps, higher amount of reps for the novice. So we'll say 12 to 20 per exercise, lower amount of reps, 5 to 8 for the intermediate. Number of sets, lower number of sets. So you'll notice there's kind of an inverse relationship. When I'm doing a lot of reps, I'm kind of doing fewer sets. When I'm doing a little bit of reps, I'm doing more sets. Tempo, we want a higher amount of time under tension. So my tempo is going to be, I know this is crazy to think of it this way, the tempo is going to be lengthened out to at least 10 seconds or more, because we're not going to get into the science of like motor learning and things like that, but just know that to develop good motor control, you need more time under tension. Now, when it gets to an intermediate client, lower amount of time under tension, so 6 seconds or less. So if we go back to these design pieces here, that's where you would fill this stuff in. What's my exercise? How many sets? How many reps? What's my loading, my tempo, and my rest? Okay, the last one is rest. Lower amount of rest for my novice. Why? Is because we're challenging motor control and not mechanical fatigue. Those aren't the same things. The other thing to keep in mind is that the demand on the central nervous system of a novice client is much lower than on an intermediate client. And that's simply because as the CNS becomes more developed, they're tapping into a lot more contraction potential. So my CNS demand goes up. I can express a lot more physically. I need more rest time between each set that I do. So specifically about exercise selection, we actually give these as resources on the Two Brain coaching side. These are just 2 movement patterns that we use, but this is a very good place to start. So we talked about the air squat. If they couldn't do that, could they lunge? Could they step back lunge instead of walking lunge? Can they do an front foot elevated split squat? So is this a exhaustive list? No, but it does provide a good place to start. So if you're not sure what movements you should be using, maybe your gym has something like this. If they don't, get in touch with me. I'll gladly send you all 5 of the PDFs that we have with this. So principle number 6, you actually have to deliver the design. So it's one thing to write it. Now you got to get your client to execute on it. So this happens in person. They come into your gym, or online, which is what Josh Grinnell talked about the other day. So you can deliver design either of those ways. The second piece is upon delivery, you need to take notes. What's their feedback? What's their facial expression when you tell them what they're doing, or when they see for the first time what they're doing? Are they confused? Do they feel confident? What about when they are actually moving? Do they appear to like what they are doing? These are all super important points for you to make sure that you're taking notes on. And again, for the online person, this is stuff that you would communicate that you're looking for feedback on. And the last piece of this is stay organized. It doesn't mean that you have to have a big fancy app or even a Google Drive folder for somebody. We will still use old school, like handwritten manila folders at my gym with printed out things that they are doing. This is in complement to the digital pieces that we use, but we always have the written backups. It helps us to stay organized. So 6, very easy, deliver their design. And 7, this is the last principle in the basics of program design, is you have to refine it. So Taylor shared a great example of the way that she would use benchmarks and check those over and over and over. This is a great way to show your client progress. Okay, it could be progress in the speed of that particular row. Maybe the first time you did a 2K row, it took you 9 minutes and 13 seconds. You've gone through this initial block of training for 6 weeks. You retest your 2K row, and oh my gosh, now it only takes you 8 minutes and 20 seconds. That is progress. Why is that important? Because it gets them to buy in that you know how to get them closer to their goals. So do some reassessment. You don't have to go through the full gamut of things that you did on day 1 when you assessed your client, but pick a couple that are relevant to what their goals are. Maybe ask them, hey, we need to reassess a couple of things. What do you think we should do? And then go from there. This is also a great time to introduce new movements. All right. Hey, you have perfected your rear foot elevated split squat. Now we're going to actually teach you how to do a walking lunge. All right. And here's why it's more difficult and more complex and why I think you're going to be successful at it. The bottom line is the refinement piece is where you can really communicate the why and how of what you are doing. It's super, super important that you don't miss out on that. So a quick recap, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions and give you some homework. Number one, assess your client. Number two, share your insights. Number three, this is starting to be where the rubber meets the road. Use the 3 Ps, prioritize, plan, and progress. Number four, keep it super simple with minimum effective dose. Number five, actually write out their initial design. What is the exercises, the sets, the reps, the tempo, the rest, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, deliver it. And then let's go to refinement. All right, so 7 principles to hopefully demystify the program design process so you coaches can become effective and efficient. Remember, the goal is not to spend 2 hours every single week per client writing these intricate designs. Keep it super simple. All right, make sure you're assessing, make sure you're refining it over time. So that was a lot for me to get through. Hopefully it wasn't too much. So I would like your feedback if you have questions, and I do want to give you a little bit of homework. So what I'm asking, if you are watching this live, if you are watching this later, I would love to see you. If program design is something that either A, you struggle with, or B, you just want some feedback on designs that you have written, put it together and send it to me. We can hop on a Zoom call real quick. I can just email you back. We can get on to chat on Facebook, whatever, wherever is your preferred method. Send it to me, and I would love to give you feedback. I think this is a really, really big opportunity for coaches to use their time super, super efficiently so they can be most effective for all of their clients. While I'm waiting for any questions to come in on the Facebook group, Buffy, I know you're still there. Mike, I know you're there. Taylor, you are too. Do you guys have any questions, any comments, concerns? Do you want to disagree with me on something? That would be amazing too.
I didn't want to go first. No, I think it was really good. I appreciate it. I was thinking, oh man, I don't do that. But then when I thought more about what you were saying, I do a lot of those things.
That's great. What do you, just out of curiosity, Buffy, how much program design do you get involved in at the gym?
So I don't program. We subscribe to like a master programmer, but I do about 70 hours a month of personal training.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, I know, it's awesome. I'm more than double usually what I coach in personal training. So I'm mainly personal trained. So all of that is my own programming for the most part. There are some clients that every now and then I will, use whatever's daily is programmed as a benchmark. Kind of, they like to know where they are compared to the class, etc.
Awesome.
So,
and what do you think it takes you just on average per client to do their program design?
Really depends on the client and how long I've been working with them. So I would say, like when you first started and you were like 15 minutes, I was like, yeah, that's about right. But that's true for brand new clients, especially brand new personal training clients. And let's say they have some limitations, or, like I have one that, has arthritis in her hip and she just started and she's 68 years old. And so there's a lot of things there that I'm going to have to take a little bit more time, be a little more creative with to get her in good positions. So initially it might take a little bit longer for that program. Right.
Right.
But then other athletes, it's like now that I have for example, 2 of my personal training clients just this past Friday both got toes to bar, like
That's
multiple
awesome.
times.
Congrats. That's a
Right.
big win, even as a
Huge deal.
coach.
Yeah, exactly. So huge deal, huge bright spot. So now I'm like, ooh, I have to change everything. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just like add it in. Right now I can go from like, it's not knee raises anymore. You know, now we're doing toes to bar, but now we also have to pay attention to, you know, how many reps, because when you first get them, you're super excited and then you rip your hands and you're not super excited anymore. So
That's a great point.
right. So it's like, now I had to kind of go backwards, like keep their, because of course they want to do them all the time because they just got them, you know? So I think that those cases of, I'll take a little bit more time now. Whereas I was almost a little bit more on autopilot with a couple of those clients because we were just right on the brink, that intermediate, you know, client working on, you know, working towards a pistol, working towards those things. So the programming looked a lot very similar for several of them. Now
Yeah.
I've got some that it's going to be tweaked more. And then obviously anytime we have on-ramping clients, that's personal training, even so I take them, their first 4 days are on-ramp programming. So that is a great tool. I start almost every client that comes in, even if they were like, yep, I've squatted before, I've done it, I still go back through those days. So that can also help, right? Because it's a great effective tool. Our on-ramp programming is written really well. I can see them move. I can go through each of the lifts. You know, I think it was Taylor that mentioned, like, I can write down exactly where they're at. So, but I think the part that I was saying I don't usually do is everything is kind of digital now. So I use Word docs, but I don't really write down old school anymore. I used to, so I don't really have a backup to, and then they also enter it into SugarWOD. So
Yep.
I'm not sure if I need to have a backup to that.
So I always like to, just because I just saw a thread the other day about this, you know, like Wodify going out or whatever provider it was, like going out, and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to deliver, you know, this thing, or I don't know how to sign this client up. And so I'm always probably a little overly cautious when it comes to that. I always want to be able to have it on file, like what they've been doing. But at the very least, I think it's a great idea just to have, you know, like a little, maybe, I mean, I know you work with Brian, so he's got Post-its hanging around all over the place. So I might tell you to grab some Post-its from Strump's office and just kind of carry that with you, so you can, you know, just jot down notes about each client as they're going through. And then even if you just upload them to their file digitally, wherever you keep it, and then throw the Post-it away, I would say that would be like the next step to kind of, you know, give a little bit more value.
I've always done the reassessment side of things, like the retesting on pen and paper. I still like doing pen and paper, but our gym is closed, so I'm not allowed to go use the pen and paper. So we're doing everything obviously digitally through True Coach right now, which is great, but I still like to have that paper record. So if I were, you know, in a perfect world where we're open and I was to do, you know, some retesting, I have sheets in those manila folders, like you said, that have those important baseline numbers somewhere, so that if, you know, everything else goes down digitally, it's, you know, it's there. But also when we do a goal review every 3 months with clients, you know, the GM or me or whoever's going to do that goal review with the client can just grab that folder and have the picture of, hey, here's all the wins or the successes that breed motivation in one place. And you don't have to go looking for them in, you know, specific you know, areas of an app that, you know, someone may or may not have put the information into. So it's just,
Yeah, or even
it's
if
an
you
old
have
school way,
access
but
to
it
it,
works
right?
well. Yeah.
What do you spend on program design, Mike? Like time, I'm sorry, time-wise.
I've got a lot of clients online right now, which, I mean, it's a completely unique situation. A new client always takes longer. I think that new client, you really want to sit down and give it some thought and plan a long-term direction and plan for them. Once I've got that new plan set up for a new client, then I'd say that 15 to 20 minutes per week, reassessing and making sure what I've got for the next week is good. With a lot of the online stuff we're doing right now, I'm really leaning heavily on avatars. So the programming is becoming a lot more generalized based on those avatars, because we just don't have, we're working on doing a value added service for the clients who are at home right now, so that they stay connected to the gym, they stay connected to us for coaching. So I'm using about 2 or 3 avatars right now for the clients that I have who are working out from home. So that really simplifies things, where you program based on an avatar and go in and just tweak based on equipment and goals and injuries and things like that. So the avatars make it a bit more general, but it definitely saves time when there's a volume like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's you guys are where you're at. It's definitely still in a very unique situation. I feel like I'm saying that every couple of weeks.
The way we're doing it, though, is allowing us to manage with it very well.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, if we haven't figured it out by our 3rd lockdown,
there's no hope.
There shouldn't be hope left anymore. But the 3rd lockdown was literally a conversation amongst our coaches to say, hey, what we did the first 2 times worked. This one might need a little bit more attention because it's summertime and there's a lot of other things. Well, it snowed here today, but it's almost summertime, and there's going to be a lot of other things for clients to get interested in doing. We want them to stay connected to the gym. So obviously we're going to give a little bit more attention this time around, but we've got a good process and good people in place, and those avatars are really helping us to not spend an entire day on the weekend programming. It's adjusting and assessing and refining based on what we're hearing throughout the week. And so it is kind of a few minutes here and there for clients who are in that avatar group.
Yeah, I think a big win for you to hang your hat on, man, is that just the reassessment piece, because what I find is that so many coaches and gyms just don't do that. And matter of fact, I'm not saying this because Chris just wrote an article about it on Two Brain Coaching the other day, but that is really the truth, is that, there's people are coming in doing all these, different workouts, but really the way to assess if the workouts are working is you have to go back and retest them, reassess them. And I could say confidently that the vast majority of gyms are not doing that. And if they took nothing else away from this, but just do that one piece, it would make a tremendous difference in the service that they offer.
One of the things I tell these new coaches that are coming through, because we do talk about programming a little bit in the level 1 or the one-on-one course at the end, because we talk about those 5 patterns of movement. So the hinge, squat, push, pull, and carry. And really, I think I attribute that back to, I read a lot of Dan John stuff when I was a younger coach. And I don't know if that's where you pulled it from too.
Oh, it certainly is. And I give him all the credit for it. It's just so beautiful and simple.
Yeah. But I what I express to these coaches is that if you have any sort of strength aspiration in your programming, you have to start very, very simply, and you have to include all of those things evenly throughout your program. If you do that, then you're going to have a solid base, right? And I think with Kroop's article, early on as a coach, one of the things I still think about to this day was that a client made a comment about my programming that was, that it's kind of like he's making it up sometimes as we go along. And I remember that still 17 years later, because it hurt, right? And it still hurts. So what I tell these new coaches is that really start with that base of scattering those, putting those movements in, figure out what you want to accomplish with those movements. And if you want to be exciting, do that in your energy system work, throw in a fun WOD or a fun track workout or whatever it is. But yeah, if you're not assessing, then you don't know where you're going. You don't know where, what your measure of success is. And it's really, really hard come goal review time to go back and look at successes when you haven't measured anything.
Yeah.
Right. And when possible, have more than one metric for success.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, part of the art in being a great coach is being able to connect the physical progress that somebody's making with the tangible goal that they came to you for. So it's like, look, do you notice as we get better at these things, or as we've gotten better at these things, you're moving closer to where your goals are, you know? Hopefully the answer is yes, if you've done a great job. If it's not, then it's like, okay, we need to, have this conversation again. Taylor, did you have any questions for me?
No, I thought it was really interesting. Random comment to add something to the conversation. One of the things I really liked about the testing and retesting that I've done in the past, like specifically the rowing ones, I really enjoy having been a rower. But I thought it was really interesting. I actually got to measure my now me's progress versus competitive rowers me's progress. And shockingly, I really didn't expect it, but I shaved like a minute and a half off of my 2000 meter row.
Holy smokes, that's a lot.
Admittedly, it was like quite a few years in between, but I realized that I wasn't very good at cardio, and that's what held me back before. And when I started doing more cardio work and like more endurance work, I guess it made all the difference. And yeah, so like when it was actually in an Orange Theory class, but when I did my 2000 meter row after like many years of not touching the rowing machine, like with the exception of doing it in the class a little bit, but like in between there was nothing, to then pull, I think it was like a 6 minutes and 30 seconds or something. I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And it was this, like you say, a win leading into the motivation where I was just like, oh my God, I have to keep this going.
Yeah, congrats. That is flying.
I don't know if it would be like that anymore. I haven't been on one in a while, but.
Wow.
Yeah, just goes to show, like, even like those tests, even if it's an initial test, like sometimes people have stuff in their past they could compare it to even. So they might already find it interesting, either motivating because they want to get back where they were, or motivating because they see they've already made some strides.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, there's two potential positives there for sure. Yeah. All right, so we're right up against 3 o'clock. I don't want to take up any more of y'all's time, so thank you very much. And again, please put together a program design. If you're watching it live or watching it later, send it my way, josh@twobraincoaching.com. Would love to give you feedback, help you get better at this. And I look forward to talking to you guys next week. Take care.